Nuzia presents the entire history of the New Generation Era. In every great story, there comes a time of rebirth, when legends fade into shadows and the spotlight searches for new faces. A time when one generation's roar fades and another's heartbeat begins. 1993, a new era dawns. The world of professional wrestling stood at a crossroads. The titans of the Golden Age were fading. The scandals were shaking the industry. Vince McMahon's empire stood on shaky ground, attacked by the media, questioned by the government, and haunted by time itself. The larger-than-life heroes of yesterday were gone. No more Hogan, no more Warrior, no more of the untouchable icons that once ruled the ring. The fans looked on, confused and hungry. Hungry for something new, something real. Then, from a silence, came a spark. A new generation, smaller in size, greater in skill, hungrier in heart. They didn't wear capes or call themselves gods. They fought for respect. They fought to redefine what wrestling could truly be. They were wrestlers, not superheroes. Artists in a changing world, carrying the burden of an entire industry. And though few believed in them, they believed in themselves. Slowly, the crowd returned. The cheers grew louder. A new hope began to rise. The new generation is here. It was bold, risky, but it would change wrestling forever. The new generation wasn't just a slogan, it was a rebellion. But what no one knew was that the same revolution meant to save the company would nearly destroy it from within. This is the untold story of risk, of rebellion, of rebirth. This is the entire history of WWE's New Generation Era. The New Generation Era, 1993 to 1997, the beginning of a new era. As the curtain closed on the colorful chaos of the 1980s, the wrestling world entered unfamiliar territory. The once mighty empire of the World Wrestling Federation was stumbling. Ratings were falling, stars were leaving, and the larger-than-life image that had defined the company was beginning to crack. The steroid trials of 1992 had shaken Vince McMahon's kingdom to its core. Sponsors backed away, networks grew nervous, and the fans who once filled arenas were now tuning out. The golden age was gone, and no one knew what would come next. But even in chaos, opportunity is born. Vince McMahon, ever the visionary, refused to let the company fall. He realized the world had changed. Audiences no longer wanted exaggerated heroes. They wanted real athletes, men who could tell stories through their craft. Wrestling needed to evolve, or it would die. So, from the ashes of controversy, McMahon crafted a bold new concept, the new generation. Out with the old, in with the new. Vince McMahon, 1993. This wasn't just a marketing slogan. It was a declaration of war on the past. The idea was simple yet risky. Replace the muscle-bound giants of the 80s with a younger, faster, more athletic roster. Bret, the Hitman, Hart, a technical genius from Canada, was chosen to lead the charge. Alongside him stood the charismatic Shawn Michaels, the cool and confident Razor Ramon, and the towering Diesel. Together, they would carry the company's future on their shoulders. Yet, not everyone believed this new direction would work. Critics called it a desperate move. Fans were skeptical. Without the wild energy of Hulkamania or the electricity of the Ultimate Warrior, could this smaller, more technical generation truly capture hearts? Vince believed they could, and he was willing to risk everything to prove it. Meanwhile, backstage, the atmosphere was tense. Many of the old guard felt betrayed, while younger wrestlers struggled to prove their worth. Salaries were lower, schedules were tougher, and the spotlight was unforgiving. But for those who survived the storm, it was a chance to create something lasting, something real. The New Generation Era begins, May 1993. The transition was not smooth. Financially, the WWF was hurting. Morale was low. Pay-per-view numbers were down, and WCW, backed by billionaire Ted Turner, was gaining momentum. It was the start of a quiet war, one that would soon explode into open conflict. But before that war could begin, the new generation had to define what it truly stood for. This was a period of experimentation. New faces debuted every few months, some unforgettable, others forgotten overnight. From Doink the Clown to Lex Luger's All-American Push, from the bright neon graphics to the rock-inspired entrance themes, everything felt new, uncertain, and alive. The new generation was raw, imperfect, and real. It was a time when talent mattered more than size, when charisma mattered more than fame. For the first time in years, wrestling felt human again. This was the dawn of a new wrestling identity, one built not on spectacle, but on skill, passion, and reinvention. But even as the lights shone on new stars, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. Behind the curtain, rival promotions were preparing to strike. The stage was set. The new generation had begun its rise, but the road ahead would test them like never before. The struggle to survive. The new generation had arrived, but not everyone was watching. In 1993, wrestling felt uncertain, almost fragile. The glittering aura of the 80s had faded, replaced by dim lights and smaller crowds. The fans who once filled Madison Square Garden were now turning their attention elsewhere to new forms of entertainment, to other sports, to the rise of cable television. For Vince McMahon and his roster of young talents, this was the hardest era to survive. The money was tight. The morale was low. Every pay-per-view felt like a gamble, and every Monday night show felt like a battle to stay relevant. Gone were the days of rock stars and grand stadiums. This was wrestling stripped down to its core. WWF faces decline in attendance. 1993 to 1994. Bret, the Hitman, Hart became the reluctant hero of this struggling empire. A man who wasn't built like a comic book character, but like a real athlete, calm, disciplined, and fiercely dedicated to his craft. His matches were technical masterpieces, and his quiet confidence gave fans something new to believe in. Bret didn't roar into the ring. He walked in with purpose. He was the antithesis of everything the 80s stood for, and that's what made him special. Razor Ramon debuts, 1992. And then there was Shawn Michaels, the showstopper, the rebel, the heartbreaker. Arrogant, electric, and unmatched in athleticism. His clashes with Bret Hart would soon define the entire era. But in these early years, Shawn was still carving his legacy, fighting for recognition in a locker room filled with uncertainty. Diesel, a former bodyguard turned powerhouse, added muscle to this new generation's Hart. He wasn't just a big man. He was cool, composed, and sharp, the perfect partner to Shawn. Together, they embodied a changing culture, less about size, more about style. But despite these rising stars, the WWF was still losing its grip. The merchandise sales were down, storylines were struggling, and the audience was aging out. Behind the curtain, McMahon was desperate to find the next big thing that could bring wrestling back to mainstream attention. The search for the next icon. He tried all, from Lex Luger's All-American Push to colorful cartoonish gimmicks like Doink the Clown and Atom Bomb. Some ideas landed, most didn't. The new generation was searching for its identity, stumbling through bright lights and bold experiments, trying to recapture the magic that once defined the industry. This was the growing pain of evolution. The company was trying to move forward while still chained to the expectations of its past. The world outside was changing too. MTV culture, grunge music, and realism were taking over. The audiences didn't want fairy tales anymore. They wanted authenticity. And slowly, the new generation began to deliver exactly that. Wrestlers started telling real stories of pride, betrayal, passion, and pain. Matches became more emotional, more athletic, more unpredictable. The audience might have been smaller, but they were more loyal than ever before. WWF, building a new foundation, 1994. Through every loss and every setback, the new generation grew stronger. They didn't have the luxury of legends to lean on. They became the legends through sheer will and performance. Bret, Shawn, Razor, Diesel, Owen, each one fighting not just opponents in the ring, but the ghosts of the past that loomed over them. This was the foundation, the struggle that would define everything that came next. Because in every great era, before glory comes grit, the rise of the new generation. By 1994, the new generation had found its rhythm. The struggling years of uncertainty had hardened this roster of underdogs into something greater something special. The era of giants and bodybuilders was gone. In its place stood pure wrestlers, men driven not by fame, but by the love of the craft. The World Wrestling Federation was transforming before everyone's eyes, and leading the charge was a man who wore pink and black. Bret the Hitman Hart had become the face of this new age, a technical master, a storyteller in motion, and a symbol of integrity in a world that often lacked it. Every time Bret stepped into the ring, it wasn't just a match, it was art. His battles with Mr. Perfect, Owen Hart, and Diesel were shaping a new identity for the company, one grounded in respect and realism. Bret Hart, champion of a new era. His Iron Man match with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 12 would later become a masterpiece. But even before that, Bret was carrying the company through its most fragile years, keeping the fans' faith alive when everything else was crumbling. And then came Shawn Michaels, the heart of the new generation. Brash, bold, and breathtaking in the ring. With every leap, every super kick, every defiant pose, Shawn reminded fans why they loved wrestling in the first place. He was flashy but fearless, controversial yet captivating. The Heartbreak Kid rises. Together, Bret and Shawn were opposites, and that's what made them magnetic. Bret represented honor and tradition. Shawn represented rebellion and attitude. And between them stood a new philosophy, wrestling as performance art. Their rivalry didn't just define the new generation, it became it. While Bret and Shawn led the front, others reinforced the foundation. Razor Ramon gave fans some of the greatest Intercontinental Championship matches in history, especially his ladder match at WrestleMania X, a performance that redefined what was possible inside a wrestling ring. Diesel, once the quiet powerhouse, had now become a world champion in his own right. He wasn't just muscle. He was charisma, presence, and leadership rolled into one. The ladder match, a new standard, 1994. The storytelling became more emotional. The matches became faster, sharper, and more athletic. The commentary shifted tone, less cartoon, more credibility. The bright colors of the 80s gave way to darker, more realistic visuals. The WWF was maturing, right before the audience's eyes. By 1995, something remarkable was happening. The locker room had changed. The fans were slowly returning. Pay-per-view numbers were climbing again. And most importantly, the new generation was no longer an experiment. It was the future, but for every success, there was pressure. Vince McMahon knew he was building something important, yet the financial strain still haunted the company. WCW was growing stronger, backed by Ted Turner's billions. And lurking on the horizon was a storm, one that would soon challenge everything the new generation had built. Still, in this moment, for the first time in years, wrestling felt pure again. The focus wasn't on muscle or media, it was on heart. The men and women of this era had done the impossible. They had restored credibility to a sport the world had written off. The new generation had risen from the ashes, not through marketing or power, but through passion. WWF, reborn through heart and skill, 1995. The future looked bright. The stars were shining. The audience was believing again. But in the shadows, a new war was quietly brewing. A war that would test their loyalty, divide their friendships, and change the business forever. Conflict and downfall, every rise brings with it a shadow. And for the new generation, that shadow came in the form of conflict. By 1995, the crack beneath the surface had begun to show. What once looked like unity was now splintered by ego, exhaustion, and outside pressure. The same young stars who had rebuilt the company were now at odds with one another and with management itself. At the heart of it all were two men, Bret the Hitman Hart and Shawn Michaels. To the audience, they were the pillars of the new generation. But behind the curtain, they had become bitter rivals. Their styles, their values, their personalities, everything about them clashed. Bret, the disciplined ring general, valued respect and tradition. Shawn, the unpredictable showman, believed in breaking the rules and rewriting the script. Bret versus Shawn, the rivalry that tore the WWF apart. Their rivalry was pure magic inside the ring, but toxic outside of it. Each match raised the bar. Each promo stoked the flames. The locker room began to split, some siding with Bret, others with Shawn. It wasn't just competition anymore. It was personal. At the same time, the company itself was under siege. Down south, a rival promotion, WCW, was rising with frightening speed. Backed by billionaire Ted Turner, WCW was luring WWF's biggest stars with massive contracts. Legends like Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, and Lex Luger defected, giving WCW the star power WWF had lost. The Monday Night War begins, 1995. And on one fateful night in 1995, WCW launched Monday Nitro, a live show directly against WWF's Monday Night Raw. The war for wrestling's soul had begun. The effect was immediate and devastating. WCW began to win the ratings battle week after week. Their new storyline, the formation of a new world order, blurred the lines between fiction and reality. Fans loved it, and suddenly, WWF's New Generation started to feel outdated. The bright colors, the family-friendly tone, the cartoonish gimmicks all felt out of place in a world that was turning darker, edgier, more real. The fans were evolving faster than the product. One by one, the cornerstones of the New Generation began to leave. Razor Ramon and Diesel, two of McMahon's most trusted stars, jumped ship to WCW, forming the core of what would become the legendary NWO. The Outsiders invade WCW, 1996. The locker room morale hit rock bottom. Vince McMahon, now losing millions, was forced to cut costs and rethink everything. The New Generation was collapsing under the weight of its own creation, its brightest stars divided, its future uncertain. Meanwhile, Bret Hart continued to carry the company on his back. Match after match, promo after promo, he fought to keep the WWF relevant. But the burden was immense. He was growing tired, frustrated, and disillusioned with the chaos around him. Shawn Michaels, on the other hand, was spiraling. His ego was growing, his attitude clashing with peers, and his behavior behind the scenes was becoming more erratic. The pressure, the fame, and the expectations were breaking him apart. By late 1996, the company was in free fall. The ratings were down, WCW was dominating, and the New Generation era, once full of hope, was now defined by loss. WWF in crisis, 1996. But from this collapse, something unexpected was forming. The tension, the anger, the rebellion. It was creating a new tone, a rawer energy, a more realistic edge. The seeds of what would become the Attitude Era were being planted in the ashes of the New Generation.
But the legend remains.
The world of wrestling was changing again. Faster, louder, and more unpredictable than ever. The New Generation was ending, but its fall would pave the way for a revolution. Climax and rebirth. By late 1997, the walls of the New Generation era were closing in. The stories, the rivalries, the sacrifices, they had all led to this moment. But no one, not even the men in charge, could have predicted how violently it would all come crashing down. The WWF locker room was divided. The lines were drawn, loyalty on one side, ambition on the other. Bret the Hitman, Hart had become the moral compass of the company, the hero of the old world, still clinging to honor, respect, and tradition. Across from him stood Shawn Michaels, brilliant, reckless, defiant. The symbol of what the New Generation had become, raw, real, and dangerously unpredictable. Montreal, November 9th, 1997, Survivor Series. It was supposed to be just another match, but it became a moment that would change wrestling forever. Bret was on his way out, signing with WCW. Vince McMahon feared his champion might take the WWF title with him. The trust was gone. The respect shattered. When the bell rang that night in Montreal, the script was written. But what happened next wasn't. As Shawn locked in Bret's own move, the sharpshooter, the referee, called for the bell. Bret never tapped out. The match was over. The betrayal was complete. Bret left the company that night. Shawn stayed, but the price was high. Trust was dead. The locker room was fractured. The fans were furious. But from that chaos came transformation. The villain was born, not in the ring, but behind the curtain. Vince McMahon, the man who once called himself a commentator, now became something else entirely. The tyrant, the manipulator, Mr. McMahon. The birth of Mr. McMahon. This wasn't just a new character, it was a new world. The blurred line between fiction and reality had vanished. Fans no longer wanted heroes, they wanted truth. And McMahon was ready to give it to them, no matter how dark it got. As the new generation collapsed, another era emerged from its ashes. Louder, bolder, more dangerous. The Attitude Era. From the ashes of the new generation came a revolution. The children of the new generation had grown up, and now they were ready to burn the world down to rebuild it. The screw job didn't just end an era. It created a legend. It redefined power, and it reminded the world that in wrestling, as in life, rebirth always comes with pain, legacy, and conclusion. Every story has an ending, but not every ending is a goodbye. The new generation may have faded from the spotlight, but its spirit, its fight, never truly died. What began as an era of uncertainty became the bridge that carried wrestling from fantasy to reality. The names that once stood in empty arenas and fought for recognition became legends in their own right. Bret Hart, the technician who gave his soul to the craft. Shawn Michaels, the rebel whose art redefined performance. Diesel, Razor Ramon, Owen Hart, the British Bulldog, men who gave everything to a vision no one believed in at first. They carried wrestling through its darkest years. They didn't have record-breaking pay-per-views or massive merchandise sales. What they had was heart. The heart to rebuild when the empire was trembling. The courage to wrestle through scandal, through change, through doubt. They became the foundation for everything that came after. Without the new generation, there would be no Attitude Era. No Austin 316. No Rock. No The X. No rebirth of the business. It's easy to forget, in the chaos of fame, who built the ground we stand on. But every time the bell rings, every time the crowd chants, every time a new star walks down that ramp, the echoes of the new generation are still there. Their legacy lives on. The new generation taught us that greatness isn't born in comfort, it's forged in struggle. That the future belongs not to those who inherit it, but to those who fight for it. They were the bridge between eras. The dreamers who refused to quit. The generation that proved wrestling would never die. If you enjoyed this story and want more deep, cinematic documentaries like this, support the journey. Subscribe to Newsia, where every story has a voice and every legend lives again.